The experience of being human has many universal qualities that make it easier to learn together than apart. The purpose of Emotional Warrior Radio is to bring the learning processes one goes through in talk therapy out into the world, so everyone has the opportunity for growth. Come and join us on this journey. All right, everyone. Hello and welcome back to the Emotional Warrior Radio. I just want to recap. For last week, we explored the more personal aspects of Danny's connection to his family and the challenges he faces in breaking out of that mental mold that his family placed him in, so he can live a more authentic life based on his current values. And where I don't think our guest today has any issue living in a way that's aligned with her values, we will see that being Danny's spouse has brought her into a situation where she's had to strongly defend those values, and also face to face with something very personal within herself that we get to towards the end of the session. So I hope that you enjoy and learn from these sessions. Let us begin. Welcome, Lorna. I know that we have talked on previous occasions, but this is a session just for you. Really more focused on, how your partner, Danny, was definitely feeling the pressure of the dysfunction that you both were feeling too, and that you were involved in coming from his family. Mm-hmm. And that being a relationship he came from before he met you, and all of the dynamics that are ingrained in him playing out. How does he juggle that? How does he have a new relationship with new dynamics when that's what's happening day in, day out? So I think that our session was, clarifying. It gave him some food for thought. It gave him some ideas about himself that I think were still unconscious, some more insight, and hopefully something for you both to discuss going forward on what he has to work on specifically within himself in order to shift this dynamic within him first, and then his relationships benefit from it, or his relationships have boundaries because of it, but that inner, it's more about what we understand and shift within ourselves that we can then apply. And it's natural to happen that way too. So, meaning it's not forced when we do it that way. It's very forced when we come from the outside in. Let's see if we can change that about that person, and then we'll be okay. That doesn't necessarily happen in these situations with dysfunctional family dynamics. So for you being the partner, I know that your goals were more about, how do I cope with the being misunderstood, being projected onto, having my own set of difficulties with OCD and, ruminating thoughts? What am I to do in this situation? And you sound like you already had a good set of coping skills, but this one threw you for a loop. So we need to reevaluate maybe and bring more knowledge in as far as this being a dynamic possibly within you too, your own family. And what all of this means at a deeper level for you might need to be reorganized or at least examined. Mm-hmm. So tell me if where you're coming from now. I know, it's been a little bit, so I want to definitely make sure I'm on the right track with what you want to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's really great timing as well, because I had a sort of emotional release yesterday after a couple of events happened, and I was able to see with a little bit more clarity. But I'll get to that in just a moment. But my background and where I come from is my family has a lot of dysfunction within it as well. And I know that I've displayed codependent behaviors in the past, but my default isn't codependency, it's hyper independence. And that's a trauma response because of my own familial trauma and personal trauma outside of that. And when I observe dysfunction within relationships, my hyper independence trauma response is to withdraw. I leave the situation, I cut myself off, I cut the access off to me. And I learned that at a young age, because the moment that I had basically a car, which was like an independence. And from my perspective, I no longer had to have these conversations with my parent about, I don't want to go to our aunt and uncles. They make us feel terrible when they're around. They pass judgment on us. They expect us to live up to these expectations that are unrealistic for us. And they're constantly comparing us to them. And I was always, fed that whole like codependent family conditioning of, with their family. You never know when you're going to see them again. You never know when the last time is that you're going to see them. And I didn't care. I didn't care about that. That wasn't something that I could be guilted by. And so when I finally got my car, I say, well, I will go in a separate vehicle so that I can leave when I want to.
Okay.
And so that was kind of like, I think the first time I really ever experienced being able to set a boundary and to stick to it. And I did. And from then on out, I was that person. And my own family thought of me as being difficult because, I had these boundaries and I wasn't going to be guilted or manipulated into me to be able to do. If I saw manipulation occurring, then I would just remove the medium that it was occurring through. So like my mother, she loves me unconditionally and I understand that, but there is this weird thing, especially financially, where if she gets me something or does something for me, it's kind of like she catalogs that transaction. So if I refuse to do something because, like, I'll say like a boundary, if I refuse to go and spend the night at my aunt and uncle's house, the one that, she would always force me to go to, she would say, well, I've done this for you. You need to do this for me. And so I just stopped accepting things from her at that point. And I remember that being a very huge argument between the two of us. I mean, it happened publicly where we just so happened to go to a fast food chain restaurant at the same time. And she was one car ahead of me. Oh, wow. And she wanted to buy my food for me. And she got out of the car because I wouldn't answer her call. And she got out of her car, stopped the line of traffic and, was like, let me buy your food for you. And I was like, no, I will just leave. So, wow. And one of my good friends that I'm still in touch with was on the phone with me when this happened, and she still brings it up every once in a while. And we laugh now because it's over a decade ago. But, that's just to illustrate my level of hyper independence of like, I will not allow myself to be controlled or manipulated or by anybody.
Well, and on that note, I think just to bring some awareness, even if you already have it, but even for the listener too, is that when you have a mother or parent or caregiver that has this this is the transactional way that for them, giving you something, buying you something, these types of things are how they equate love, care, and control.
Yes.
Right? Over situation. And so as long as you're receptive to that symbolic gesture, and what it comes with, which means you have to do for me if I'm doing for you, as long as they have you in the equation of the transaction, you are really like the child will feel exactly this, pushing towards guilt, push towards or feeling attacked or feeling controlled or manipulated to feel badly because you're not doing what the parent wants. So again, there's a lot of emotional manipulation here that you have been able to assess. And then, your difficulty is you weren't the temperament or the personality style that was going to accept something like this. But then it became, so you're an independent person that because of mom became hyper independent. Because that's what was required in order to really put a boundary up for that person. And so you identify with it now.
Right.
See, this is where, some parts of our personality where we can be great caretakers, but because we were dependent on to be caretakers, we become superhuman caretakers. And that becomes a huge weakness, right? That becomes something that now exhausts us. That becomes something that we have to kind of carry around. So in some ways, what we try to do is look at the hyper part, look at the over part. Like, this is a good part of my character. This person with their control issues and with how they want to run something, put an added layer onto it. Now, do I stay with that or do I start to deconstruct that part and say, okay, I can be this without that extra? Because that extra, I think again, is because because moms and parents pose such a psychological danger to children of merger, of interrogation, of fusion, of being inside of, and being able to really control a child from the inside out. So that's not usually who you deal with in the world, but we are dealing with another mom. So maybe that got triggered again. So, I just wanted to kind of, give that a little bit of insight. So, but you can go on or say what you thought in that moment too.
Absolutely. I think, the hyper independence really did become, there was a light shined on it after everything that happened with Danny's family. And I didn't really understand that I was hyper independent until I started self-reflecting. So these, there were two like main instances that happened with Danny's family. And the first time, because I wasn't like super directly attacked, it was kind of it was an indirect attack towards Danny's brother. And I just happened to be the middleman because, coming back to that hyper independence, that temperament that you mentioned earlier, I perceive myself as a gentle person. I want to help people. I want to be a caretaker. I want to be a safe space, but temperament wise, because I've curated this sort of armor over the years, that's, a result of my hyper independence. My temperament doesn't come off that way to people. I come off rather intense. It wasn't until my adulthood where I realized I didn't like have to yell every time I spoke, because I just feel things so passionately. And I think that people kind of mistake that for like aggression. And I'm not a conflict avoidant person. And I don't think that conflict is negative in nature, but I know a lot of other people do. So, but it's often a mistranslation of just passion and advocacy for myself and the people that I care about. And so the first time that this like sort of indirect attack occurred, I put the boundary out there of, I'm not going to associate with this person. They have already displayed what I perceived to be toxic traits, and they've proven that to me. And that occurred because they tried to indirectly attack me, and I directly confronted them. And I said, this is not something that is okay with me. And if the behavior does continue, then we're going to have a problem. And
you want to give that, and then go ahead, but then if you want to give that context, please feel free.
Yes, absolutely. So, the context was that this person came up with a story that I hated them, and I didn't. It was like we started out friendly and I liked them, but over the course of our relationship and observation of her relationship with Danny's brother, I was like, some things started occurring to me where I was like, okay, so this is a person that displays toxic behaviors that I see not trying to change them. And I'm a person that is consistently self-reflecting to be a better person. And I don't want someone like that in my life to derail that work. And so I just started to pull away from them. And really, I just ended up not talking to them anymore. And that kind of further fed the story to them that, that I hated them. And they were saying these things to family members, to Danny's family members, and knowing it would get back to me. And eventually went directly to Danny. And that was when I confronted them. And I said, this is not okay. And I was kind of an asshole about it too, because I was so frustrated with the indirectness of it. And I just confronted them and I said, I don't care enough about you to hate you, but the way that you're behaving, and trying to talk to my husband and family members about me, that's a problem. And if that behavior continues, then we're going to have an issue. So if you just leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. And let me reflect on that a little bit, because this is why context helps to see where and you're speaking very nicely, by the way. You're incredibly diplomatic and a negotiator. And I'd hire you on my legal team for sure. But at the same time, I think that's where this is hurtful. This is gossip. Yes.
You seeing somebody treat somebody else badly, call a spade, and not being respected for just, for being, and then being disrespected for doing that. And then, but the coping skill that just wanted to kind of say, this is the great example of the first level of defense that you tried was the withdraw and isolate. And within that silence, their imagination starts to go in the negative directions to make sure that they, you're not doing anything, but that doesn't matter. They can represent you as the person that is going to be the scapegoat for this toxicity or for the gossip. And it's your problem because you're not involving. And this is an underhanded way for that kind of, again, it is an enmeshed dynamic where one person says they're not going to be in denial. Then they start to get all sorts of heat, all sorts of accusations come flying. So I understand, that you feel like you said, I wasn't probably so nice. Well, okay, that's all right. At some level we have emotions and it hurts, and it's important to be able to, have that too. So, but again, I think that in some ways having the boundary, and communicating it, it's just like, when is it going to be the point of which I call a spade, when I start saying, this is what I see, and I'm not going to be able to participate in it. Do your own thing, but I don't involve us. Yeah. I think that, it's just kind of an upfront approach, because when we try to withdraw that space for them, I think that's where giving them too much length, the boundary, once it's there, once you feel it, create the statement, create the, make that movement forward towards saying something, because, and again, it's less threatening at that point too. And they don't necessarily pull you in, but that's, and that could be something for the future. Right. Too. So I wanted to mention that, because this is where, a lot of times our defenses are default modes. They're not.
That hyper independence trauma response came through immediately. And I didn't really classify her as a person in my brain that even deserved an explanation. I was just like, I don't care about you.
Exactly.
And I do understand how that was harmful for them. And even though I don't necessarily think that they deserve any sort of compassion from me, I still tried to after all of this. And I mean, initially, the whole reason that I even withdrew and didn't set a boundary verbally, out loud, was because I was kind of playing into Danny's codependent family structure. I didn't want to upset them, because behind the scenes, they were talking a lot about Danny's brother's girlfriend, the girlfriend, and the things that she said and did that really bothered them. And I actually tried to kind of refrain from saying anything, because I actually had a really close insight to Danny's brother and his girlfriend's relationship, because Danny and his brother were working together. So Danny became the brother's confidant. So I was hearing a lot of things that the family didn't know about. They were just, speculating and gossiping based off of, exchanges that they witnessed or things that she would put on her social media and all this kind of stuff. And I really tried to kind of stay out of it. Like you said, I kind of am diplomatic because I don't want to be pulled into that. But I mean, eventually, my frustration with this person grew so much because of the backhanded, passive aggressive, indirect ways that she was trying to attack me, that, I started, participating in that gossip. And then the attack occurred, and I was blamed for Danny's brother and his girlfriend's breakup because Danny's brother wouldn't defend her to me or something along those lines. And, they broke up momentarily, got back together. The family, some people checked in on me, but there was also, I noticed this distinct effort to include the girlfriend again, because Danny's brother asked them to. He asked them to give her a second chance. And I was really taken aback by that. And it hurt my feelings a lot, because I thought to myself, why is her comfort more important than my safety? And that's when I started starting to kind of pull back from a lot of people in Danny's family. Except for his sister. And his sister and I became very close during this process. Danny's sister, prior to all of the drama that occurred, was his best friend in the entire world. It was incredibly important for him, for us to get along. And we made that effort initially for Danny. And then we developed our own relationship. And she's a very closed off, hyper independent person like I am. And we connected a lot in that regard. And, she protected both of us during all of this. She understood why we wanted to have these boundaries. The girlfriend was not allowed in our house anymore. When we went to family gatherings, we didn't speak to her. Sometimes we'd even have our own individual gatherings with Danny's brother, or sorry, Danny's sister, the one that was protecting us. And we grew very close with her. And that incited jealousy from Danny's brother and the girlfriend. They were like, oh, so this is how you're going to behave. And Danny's brother talked to Danny's sister, and she confronted me about my behavior. And it was really upsetting to her that she didn't realize that what she was doing with Danny and I was upsetting their brother. And I kind of saw that as a sort of manipulation, and I called it as I saw it. I said, I think that that's a manipulation. I think that that's strings being pulled from the girlfriend. Right. Because eventually the girlfriend admitted that a lot of this was rooted in jealousy towards me, because Danny and I own a home. I'm married into the family. I have a very close relationship with a lot of the family members. And I was accepted and loved and supported. And, she really wanted that. And for some reason, she viewed me as the person in the way of that. And I understand from probably from her perspective, it was because I don't have a temperament of I'll just sit back and take whatever. If I see something that I think is wrong, I'm going to say it. And I thought her behavior was wrong. It was terrible. She's an awful person, you know? And, because of the codependency that runs within Danny's family, they had a really hard time separating their relationship from her and the brother. If they wanted to have the brother in their lives, they had to put up with the girlfriend.
Right.
That was their perspective. And I was saying things like, if you tell your brother that you expect his girlfriend to be respectful, and he says, well, fuck you, I'm not doing that, and decides to leave the relationship, that's not anything to do with you. You can't manage that. That's his decision.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is where in some ways we start to see, as a kids in a family, we can totally, oh, what are you doing today? Or who's your friend? And I want to make this, oh, and what sports and what's going on with your teacher and so parents have this inside view to their kids' lives. Their kids can say, oh, I want that ice cream too. And I want my girlfriend to be accepted, and this sounds like the family never grew up. Now we've got a bunch of adults functioning at the same level as they did as children, completely, nobody's separated or individuated. We've got sister playing protector. We've got people trying to satisfy, both sides of some sort of equation. No one is living independently minded. So this process I talk about, separation and individuation, is that when you are in your family, yes, your love object was what we call it. So psychologically, you're bonded with the parent, even if they have narcissism or codependency or anything like this, there's still a bond there. Well, what happens is, unfortunately, if they don't help you to emotionally develop a sense of self-worth and independence separate from them, and then encourage you to go out into the world and focus on your life and developing relationships like you did with Danny. And, and Danny was having a hard time, it was with, he was still trying to juggle both, because if the parent doesn't encourage this or develop or have a healthy individuation process with their child, and it can take longer than I think child development types of theories, say. It can take quite a lot of years, and it can happen at any time. Even you can do this later in life. These folks haven't done it at all. and so, I think what's really difficult, and you've done it through your own attachment to your own independence. In some ways, that's what we call earned secure attachment, where you've created a path for you to walk down towards individuation, self-parenting, self-care, and then you can have a relationship with someone based on like a mutual individuality, right? And then coming together. This person likes this thing you got going on, you both are in love, but at the same time, and you get married and everything's happening, but still his attachment was still of two minds, because he was still being used as an emotional container for the family. He still needed to be the youngest. He still needed to be the one that needed them to protect him and to show his worth in order to gain his independence one day, I guess. There's a few things that were themes for him to break away. So I see you getting, pulled into this enmeshment and really not being able to see what's, up or down, because this is a family dynamic that, again, I mean, you have to buy into the dynamic, the delusion, the family delusion, in order for you to survive it. So, and I think in kind of moving forward towards what we wanted to work on necessarily was, your idea of having relationships with any one person in this family. Right. When really your relationship is with Danny.
Right.
First and foremost, I think that's the thing, is that getting into this thinking that, you would be accepted, respected as an independent person. Now you can see, I think this is very kind of primal and like primitive when you get in with a family like this. How does it feel when you're trying to, with trying to, there is a sense of wanting to belong, find acceptance and get along. Was there a time where it was just all bliss out and you were able to like, oh, everybody's so happy and so excited. And then they got you in and then everything changed? I guess I'm wondering how they got you, somebody like yourself. I don't think you've dealt with this kind of dynamic before. How did they draw you in to feeling safe enough to be really part of what they were doing for a time?
It was Danny's sister.
Okay.
Yeah. I had a lot of love for Danny's mom, and, because they live out on the same plot of land. It's a huge plot of land in a valley, and there's like aunts and cousins out there as well. And I saw them quite frequently because we're not very far away from them. We're only like a 10-minute drive away. And so we visited frequently. I had a lot of love for them, but it was really Danny's sister who reached out to make me feel comfortable and to make an attempt to understand my anxiety and my OCD and how that can kind of interact with my ability to exist within these structures. And I think also for her, and this is speculation on my part, but I think also for her, because we share that commonality of being a hyper independent person, once we started to get closer, I think for her, I became a person that was able to help her feel safe to kind of express her own boundaries. If we got to a point where we called each other sisters. And if Danny and her's mom was like trying to do the guilt thing that my own mom would do, I would stand in front of the sister and be like, no, this is not happening. Like, I became an advocate for her. And so I found a lot of safety in that relationship. And I thought, and I think at that time, I was providing safety as well for this person. Like, they were like, oh my God, like I can things too. Like I can stand up for myself. And, the more progress that Danny and I made in our own relationship and as individuals, we shared that kind of growth with the sister. And it seemed like she was kind of coming along. I would start to see things that we had talked about be internalized by her.
Right. She was thinking about it. Right.
Right. And I was like, oh, like, this is great. Like, I'm kind of, I'm not in this family. Like, I'm not enmeshed with this family, but I found this one person in the family that I can have an individual relationship with that makes me feel safe to be around the family. If that makes sense. Because Danny, when he was originally, before he had done any of this codependency work, he would just leave me at family gatherings. And his sister would kind of, she would take me under her wing and be like, hey, are you overwhelmed? A lot of the times the gatherings happened in this valley. She lives out there. We'd be at one house and she'd say, do you want to go to mine and just hang out there? And I'd be like, yes, please. She became my safe space when I was there. And so, and I think that, Danny really noticed this happening too. And then, going back, like what we were saying to the girlfriend, the initial attack that kind of was the catalyst to everything where we're at now, sister became the protector. Then sister was talked to by older brother about being this protector and, basically put in a situation where she was made to think like, because you're protecting them, you're exiling us. And I didn't see it that way. And, she brought it up to me and she was very tearful. Like, it was a very hard conversation for her to have with me because I initially was dismissive of like, no, I'm not adjusting my boundaries at all. Like, I have these. And eventually I noticed it wasn't for the girlfriend, it was for the brother. Danny's sister wanted their older brother not to feel exiled, not realizing that it was honestly his choice for being with a person that people didn't feel safe around and didn't want to have a relationship with. He thought that he could just stay in this relationship and his family relationships would be the same. And that's not how this works. And they were trying to accommodate that because of the codependency. And I was like, no, I'm not taking part in that. But I did compromise on my boundaries. And I said, well, I'm not going to change my boundaries towards the girlfriend, but I will be kinder to your brother. And I reached out to the brother. And because basically the whole reason that the initial attack has happened, the protection has occurred, we're developing a relationship. It's about 9 months later when the sister has a conversation with me about, I don't want to exile my, or exclude my other brother. And it's difficult because you're not including his girlfriend in things because I was trying to host a family garage sale. It was like, honestly, the first time that I'd even opened my home to the entirety of Danny's family. And we've been together for 9 years. Okay. So it was a big deal for me. And I said, no, I'm not including the girlfriend. I'm not including her. This is not, no. And that's where the whole conversation of being excluded came from. And I said, I'm still not going to include her, but I will make nice with your brother. And I reached out to him and I thanked him for respecting my boundaries. And I said, because you have done that, it's made me feel more comfortable to be more civil towards you and your girlfriend. And I will commit to that. And I will acknowledge, that sometimes I might have unnecessarily been an asshole about things, participated in gossip. But, I still hold firm on my safety around this person feels compromised. So I'm not going to put myself in situations that include her. And he respected that and, acknowledged that the difficulties that she presents in her own relationships in life. And that is what spiraled her to have another attack. Mm-hmm. And this very direct, she compromised mine and Danny's personal information by giving our numbers out to people. And we started to receive harassing text messages. I mean, I'm not kidding. I received a picture of a severed gangrenous penis from a number I didn't know, calling me a whore, and that I was the problem with the world and why it was such a shitty place because I was a narcissistic cunt. Mm-hmm. Like, it was cruel. It was incredibly cruel. And we didn't even know that it was the girlfriend initially. We speculated, but it was from a number we didn't know. Mm-hmm. And then because she couldn't help herself, she sent me a text message pretty shortly afterwards, mimicking the same thing that I had told her 9 months ago about the next time you talk to my boyfriend about me, there's going to be problems. And my conversation with the boyfriend was initiating contact of like, here's an olive branch.
Well, yeah. I mean, see, I think that this is the thing is that where you're there, let's see, you are trying to have relationships with individuals, but they are still totally locked into a dynamic that isn't about that. They can only have a relationship with you as an individual on the down low. The sister can have a party with just you there and her, and the brother, you can talk to him on the phone and you can, be honest about where you've come from and respect what he's asking for. But when it gets back into the relational sphere, when it's not just you and a person talking without all these other people around, that's when it goes back to chaos. And I think what is really, I think, important even for you and for listeners too, is that when they get into these situations, and I didn't work with narcissism specifically through social media because it's a very difficult, these are very difficult experiences to have with people, and and there are victims of narcissism that are definitely in the codependent spectrum for sure, have accepted, tried to set a boundary, the more you accept somebody and the more they see that you're going to do that. And then you set the boundary, the higher their rage is going to be. So that's why I say immediately do not discount your gut feeling about a person. If you start to try to just, whatever, you can be civil and then set a boundary without them even really knowing, or you start to give in, and then you have to set it. Boy, here we go. Because now they have something because there is rage that is being repressed or needs an outlet, and they use you as that. So this again, I think is it's a difficult story, but I have heard it before and mostly in the social media work, to be honest, is like, wow, they did what? Mm-hmm. I mean, the stakes just get so high. They become like, until you give in or they break you, or they don't feel like they're getting enough attention. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what kind of attention they need. I mean, what kind of attention it is. If it's negative attention, great. Mm-hmm. I can set off the fireworks of insanity because I know I've got my, talons in somebody that can't say no, that has no boundaries, that is a passive codependent type. That's who they can know they have. And I have seen the most amazing displays of aggression from women and men. Mm-hmm. Of once boundaries are trying to be set. And so we take this way back down all the way, because this is the thing. It's like, your mom getting out of the car and saying, I'm going to buy your dinner, and this woman saying, if you don't let me into the garage sale, I'm going to, put all your information out there. It's like, what? Yeah. Why are these people up here and you're down here going, no, all that you can't have is access to me emotionally, psychologically, and physically. Yeah. Like that's all I'm saying, is that you have to be willing to respect that I need to be able to say yes to you. And if I'm not saying yes, that's going to need to be accepted. It's my choice. They think it's something about them. And, I know it is in some ways, but I think this is where I think boundaries need to really be framed. It is something that we can say externally to people that treat us badly, but they're actually their standards, their values, their parameters within our own minds. That I am this person. This is how I show up in my life. This is how I show up in relationships. And I present this. And if you're so off from that, then the boundaries is directed, it's exerted. That's who I am. It's not and that's the thing. I think this is where people want to destroy that independence. And I don't know if it's groupthink or dependency or narcissism. Right. I don't know what it is, but I do find it to be like, it is, wow, how powerful independence is to somebody that doesn't see boundaries. And why can't it be respected by more people? Why is this so hard in society and families and relationships? So
yeah, well, that's why I'm talking to you too, because I just, where you were going with that was really making me think about like that next thing that happened was Danny and I were like, surely this has to be enough. Like, for this level of aggression and violence and sadism, has to be enough for them to say, we won't accept this behavior. We will protect our own and we are not going to let you hurt them. And it was like the exact same time he took her back and everyone pressed us to forgive and forget. And we were like, fuck no, no. And it became a huge ordeal for them. And like you said, it was like, we established this level of independence. And it was I'll admit, like I had to press Danny to set a boundary. I was like, and I think for him, a lot clicked all of a sudden. I was, I had to press him to say, no, like we are not doing this again. And, then, he was like, you're right. We can't. And in his mind, he was like, my family will come along.
Yeah.
And
that's what he told me.
Yeah. And I understand that, he really did. Family is so important to him. And because that was what was instilled in him. He was like, well, if my family has the same values that I do, when it comes to our relationships, they'll come along with me. And they didn't. And it was really hard to watch that realization happen for him, where I'm like, oh my gosh, I had this revelation in my youth. And so I'm compartmentalizing all of the anger and betrayal that I feel because I'm trying to tend to this discovery that he's going through that's hurting him. It's really hurting him. Yeah. And I start to see the hurt that's being inflicted upon him. And that adds to the layer of anger that I'm feeling and the need we're totally withdrawing at this point. My hyper independence trauma response went into total overdrive. I had to take Danny's phone away from him for 2 days so that he wouldn't contact his family. And I changed my number because I was like, it's been compromised. I went online to see if because her claim was that she didn't give it out, that she talked enough about me to somebody that they went and bought my information. I went and bought my information offline from this same resource to prove that, my stuff is not on there. And I was presenting it to the family of come on, please logic your way through this. She is lying and she's trying to tell me that she's trying to tell you guys that I'm the liar, that I'm the person that's trying to come in between everybody. Everything that she is doing and acting on, she's accusing me of doing. So the less they responded to me being please, look at this and understand, and then it didn't. And so I just completely withdrew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that is the only, withdrawing is, or not trying to give any more attention to this is more of the way I think about it, because you can see the level of attack. And if people are really willing to put the blind, so the higher the level, the higher the defense has to go, remember? So it has to work in unison. So, you have to really get, overly logical, and he has to become, please, can you see, and try to get them to empathize. All of the, the withdrawal of affect, the withdrawal of wow, very clear. Danny had to go through. Mm-hmm. I think probably, I would say that was probably the most important emotional experience here, was for support around seeing what his family's capable of as far as supporting, abuse at this level. Yes. That's something that he has to recognize and make sense of and understand in his own experience. So I think that in and of itself, and you too, recognizing that this is not a boundaries, deal anymore. This is something more significant. And so real things have to happen, not just let's see if we can play our cards and they'll change one day. Yeah. Not part of the process in this one.
And I'm following you so well because it that kind of leads me to that like emotional release and realization that I had yesterday is like after everything that happened, like you said, I acknowledged it and recognized it as abuse that was happening to me and Danny and to Danny's brother. This person is incredibly abusive to the people in her life. And I was like, I don't function from a place of like, I can accept that, I've never been that person. I've never allowed it to happen to myself, because I was abused as a child. And I mean, even through like early adulthood, like college, like if it wasn't my family, it was boyfriends because, my family set up like terrible examples of what relationships were like for me. And I worked really hard not to let that happen to me anymore.
Right.
And it did. And I felt completely out of control from it. And I'm probably going to start crying, but like the realization that I had yesterday was just like, the reason that I'm so angry is because I'm really afraid. And I haven't been afraid in a long time because I worked really hard to create a life for myself where I didn't have to be. And then it was like, it was happening to me and I was like desperately pleading for people to like help me. And I was just dismissed, and I'm angry because like this person who's like, she's really inconsequential, but she made me feel terrible. She got through the armor that I've had and, and that I specifically put on so this wouldn't happen again. And she like sliced through it with such ease. And I was like, how did this happen? Like, how did this happen to me?
Well, I think that that's a really important, it's an important moment, I think, too, to, pause and ask a question and then come back next week and talk more about it, because I think this is really the most important aspect of your own breakthrough. Because like I was saying to Danny about Danny's breakthrough, it's one of when the veil is pulled back, when all of our efforts still end up in a consequence that we were fighting so hard to refuse to see or to refuse to allow happen, in both of your cases, something different, we have an emotional release. And that emotional release is really important because it's fine. Like we want levees in our brain to hold some things back, but if the levee holds back an emotional experience, it's going to help us grow and recognize our vulnerability and recognize who we are at a deeper level. And I think then that's what is really problematic. And we do have to have pain sometimes in order to have these moments. So I think it feels like in some ways there is the levee broke and now that's part of, it leaks through. That's the point of some of this work too, is that we let it leak through. So in a safe place, we can start to process it, because a lot of times we build these levees as well, because there's not a safe space to process it, and then finally it's like, okay, I need to have this experience and understand what it is from a different perspective, an emotional one. And I think that's something that we can do, because I personally felt like we were going to, if we were going to talk about the OCD aspect or ruminating thoughts, I was going to really draw your attention to the development of the defense and what it's really holding back are these feelings, but you're having them. So this is really good. So we don't have to look at that issue to get to this. We can see this issue as actually, if we really start to process this, that will come up in like a swell and you'll be able to move it on.
Well, that's exactly what I did in all this time in between, when this happened, which was almost 9 months ago. It's very clear that this is a cycle for this person, for her. But, I spent a lot of time just really thinking about like, is this really how I want to continue living? And I started like writing about it where I was, I just started evaluating like, when I put my first piece of armor on and then like when it became redundant, where I kept adding pieces and when I didn't need to. And that, my drive as a human being was like, what did I call it? Like retaliatory perseverance, like, like something along those lines of like, I'm never going to let anybody keep me from developing in life and getting what I want and thinking, I never let people's misperceptions of me bother me, but like all of a sudden it was. All of a sudden, all this armor that I had, which had layers and layers and layers added to it, and this promise that I made to myself that I would never let people's misperception of me keep me from anything, that I would never let it affect me. And then all of a sudden it was, and I was like, why is this happening? Why now? Why this person? Like, how? And like, that made me angrier because I was like, this person is terrible. Like, why am I learning a lesson from them and their actions? And
but, but I think that's the question. And if you are, I mean, that's the thing is that, and to talk more about it, because you have such a good way of processing and thinking out loud too. If we could reconvene and talk more about this, that would really be helpful, because I think the whys and then what comes up from there is part of our personal insight. So that doesn't ever happen again, for real, not because we, put up the fence. So if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Well, then I will see you next time.
Okay.
All right, to wrap up, we can see her struggle to uphold the values of being a protective, independent woman with boundaries was not what she expected, especially when a narcissistic person entered the scene. This type of person is the most dangerous type for a codependent family because their strategy is to avoid conflict with denial, channel their frustrations through gossip and judgment, and simply allow the drama that person creates to persist. And I can believe that she can see now and has accepted the futility in involving herself in any further trying to get them to see things her way or from her perspective. However, in the aftermath, she is getting to see something about herself, which is much more personal and emotional, that we will work through next week. I hope to see you there. And please, in the meantime, visit me on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, all under The Bianca Grace. And then also the Emotional Warrior community at biancagrace.com for more guidance and resources for healing codependency.